Hi everyone, let's learn psychology with me. Today we will learn about judgment and reasoning. I'm just going to mention some important points from the textbook that I'm reading at the moment. It's Cognitive Psychology by Daniel Reisberg. People use cognitive shortcuts or heuristics to make judgments. People use heuristics even when they're highly motivated to be accurate, and trained experts often rely on the same heuristics. The area highlighted in green is the orbitofrontal cortex. The picture is actually in the textbook. The portion of the brain just behind the eyeballs. Many researchers argue that this brain region plays a crucial role in the processes through which we detect and interpret our emotions. Attribute substitution. Frequency estimate. It's an assessment of how often various events have occurred in the past. For many of the judgments you make in day-to-day life, though, you don't have direct access to frequency information. You probably don't have instant access to count of how many VWs break down in comparison to how many Hondas. How, therefore, do you proceed in making your judgments? In making your choice in commuting routes, you're likely to do a quick scan through memory, looking for relevant cases. The strategy you're using here is known as attribute substitution, a strategy in which you rely on easily assessed information as a proxy for the information you really need. Attribute substitution, a strategy in which you rely on easily assessed information as a proxy for the information you really need. In this judgment about traffic, the information you need is frequency. How often you've been late when you've taken one route or the other, but you don't have access to this information. As a substitute, you base your judgment on availability. How easily and how quickly you can come up with relevant examples. The logic is this: examples leap to mind must be a common, often experienced event. A struggle to come up with examples must be a rare event. This strategy, relying on availability as a substitute for frequency, is a form of attribute substitution known as the availability heuristic. It's the opposite of representativeness heuristic. The availability heuristic. In each case, you're relying on attribute or availability or resemblance that's easy to assess, and that's the source of the efficiency. And in each case, the attribute is correlated with the target dimension so that it can serve as a reasonable proxy for the target. Events or objects that are frequent in the world are, in most cases, likely to be available in memory. Nonetheless, these strategies can lead to error. The organization of memory creates a bias in what's easily available, and this bias in availability leads to an error in frequency judgment. The wide range of availability effects. Rare events are likely to be well recorded in memory. This will in turn make these events easily available to you. The representativeness heuristic. How does the representativeness heuristic work? Many of the categories you encounter are relatively homogeneous. The category birds, for example, is reasonably uniform with regard to the traits of having wings, having feathers, and so on. Virtually every member of the category has these traits too. In this regard, each member of the category resembles most of the others. All birds are mostly the same. Likewise, the category motels is homogeneous with regard to traits like motel has beds in each room, has a Bible in each room, and has an office, and so on. Again, in these regards, each member of the category resembles the others. The representativeness heuristic capitalizes on this homogeneity. We expect each individual to resemble the other individuals in the category. For example, we expect each individual to be representative of the category overall. As a result, we can use resemblance as a basis for judging the likelihood of category membership. So if a creature resembles other birds you've seen, you conclude that the creature probably is a bird. This heuristic use can lead to an error. Many people believe that if you toss a coin over and over, let's say it lands heads 6 times in a row, then the next toss of the coin is more likely to come up tails. The reason is that if the coin is fair, then any series of tosses should contain roughly equal numbers of heads and tails. If no tails have appeared for a while, then some are overdue to make up the balance. The pattern of thinking is called the gambler's fallacy. To see that it is a fallacy, bear in mind that a coin has no memory. So the coin has no way of knowing how long it has been since the last tails. What produces the gambler's fallacy? It's the category homogeneity. We know that in the long run, a fair coin will produce equal numbers of heads and tails. Therefore, the category of all tosses has this property. Our assumption of homogeneity, though, leads us to expect that any representative of the category will also have this property, like 50-50 split. But this isn't true. Some sequences of tosses are 75% heads, some are 5% heads in reality. Reasoning from a single case to the entire population. Let's see this one here. If you listen to conversation around you, you'll hear man who or woman who arguments. What do you mean? Cigarette smoking causes cancer? I have an aunt who smoked for 50 years and she runs in marathons. Often these arguments seem persuasive, but they have force only by virtue of the representativeness heuristic and your assumption of category homogeneity. It all depends on what you have heard and what examples you have. Can those people represent the whole category or the whole population? Detecting covariation. People who do the first tend to have a lot of the second. Okay, the term covariation has a technical meaning. For example, X and Y covary if X tends to be on the scene whenever Y is. and if X tends to be absent whenever Y is absent. Covariation is important. What you need to consider when checking on a belief about cause and effect. Confirmation bias is a tendency to be more alert to evidence that confirms your belief rather than to evidence that might challenge them. Base rate information. Information about how frequently something occurs in general. Diagnostic information. Information about the particular case. Ways of thinking, type 1 and type 2. Which one is your thinking? Type 1 as the label for the fast, easy sort of thinking. Type 1, fast, easy sort of thinking. Type 2 as the label for the slower, more effortful thinking. People choose when to rely on each system. Presumably, they shift to the more accurate type 2 when making judgments that really matter. People rely on type 1 heuristics even when incentives are offered for accuracy and even when making important professional judgments. Even when making medical diagnoses that may literally be matters of life and death. Surely, people would choose to use type 2 in these cases if they could, yet they still rely on type 1 and fall into error. Type 2 is likely to come into play only if it's triggered by certain cues and only if the circumstances are right. Type 2 judgments are slower than type 1. On this basis, it's not surprising that heuristic-based judgments are more likely when judgments are made under time pressure. Type 2 judgments require effort. So this form of thinking is more likely if the person can focus attention on the judgment being made. That means the person has to have time to make the judgment and to do the thinking. Triggers for skilled intuition. Type 1 thinking is not really a bad or sloppy thinking because fast and efficient thinking can be quite sophisticated if the environment contains the right sort of triggers. Base rate neglect is more likely if the relevant information is cast in terms of probabilities or opportunities, or proportions, sorry. Large samples are more reliable, more trustworthy than small samples. Confirmation and disconfirmation. Induction. The process through which you make forecasts about new cases based on cases you've observed so far. Just as important, though, is deduction, a process in which you start with claims or assertions that you count as given and ask what follows from these premises. For example, perhaps you're already convinced that red wine gives you headaches or that relationships based on physical attraction rarely last. You might want to ask, what follows from this? What implications do these claims have for your other beliefs or actions? Deduction has many functions, including the fact that it helps keep your beliefs in touch with reality. Confirmation bias. A greater sensitivity to confirming evidence and a tendency to neglect disconfirming evidence. Reinterpreting disconfirming evidence. When people encounter information consistent with their beliefs, they're likely to take the evidence at face value, accepting it without challenge or question. In contrast, when people encounter evidence that's inconsistent with their beliefs, they're often skeptical and scrutinize this new evidence, seeking flaws or ambiguities. Even when this confirming evidence is undeniable, people sometimes don't use it, leading to a phenomenon called belief perseverance. That means people still believe, still persevere, they still have perseverance on their own beliefs. Logic, reasoning about syllogisms. Categorical syllogisms, a type of logical argument that begins with two assertions, the problem's premises, each containing a statement about a category. The syllogism can then be completed with a conclusion that may or may not follow from these premises. The cases shown in the figure are all valid syllogisms. That is, the conclusion does follow from the premises stated. In contrast, here is an example of invalid syllogisms. All P are M, all S are M, therefore all S are P. For example, all plumbers are mortal, and all secretaries are mortal. All secretaries are plumbers, so of course it's not true. Belief bias. If a syllogism's conclusions happens to be something people believe to be true anyhow, they're likely to judge the conclusion as following logically from the premises. They will endorse an illogical argument if it happens to lead to conclusions they like. And they will reject a logical argument if it leads to conclusions they have doubt about. Basically, people want to support something they believe in. Risk-seeking. If the frame casts a choice in terms of losses, decision makers tend to be risk-seeking. They prefer to gamble, presumably attracted by the idea that maybe they'll avoid the loss. Risk aversion. Risk aversion. They refuse to gamble, choosing instead to hold tight to what they already have. Opt-in versus opt-out. Countries like Austria, with a reasonably similar culture, uses an opt-out system. Here, 99% of the citizens agree to be donors, unless they opt out not to be donors. Or unless they say explicitly they don't want to be donors, opt out, the assumption is that they will be donors, organ donors if they die. The shift in framing caused a change in the factors relevant to that justification, and this is why the shift in framing reversed the patterns of decisions. Emotion. Emotion can influence decisions. Memories can cause a strong bodily reaction. Anticipated events can also produce bodily arousal. You use these sensations, Damasio calls the somatic markers, as a way of evaluating your options. In making a choice, you literally rely on your gut feelings to assess your options, and an approach that pulls you toward options that trigger positive feelings and away from ones that trigger negative feeling. The orbitofrontal cortex is crucial in your use of these somatic markers because this is the brain region that enables you to interpret your emotion. Affective forecasting, your predictions for your own emotions, is often inaccurate. Affective forecasting, your predictions for your own emotions, is often inaccurate. People can usually predict whether their reaction will be positive or negative. So they realize that scoring well on an exam will make them feel good, and that a romantic breakup will make them feel bad. but people consistently overestimate how long this feeling will last and underestimating their ability to adjust to changes in fortune and how easily they will find excuses and rationalizations for their own mistakes. In general, people are unable to move efficiently toward happiness. The best they can do is stumble upon happiness. Other authors say that we all like to have choices, but argues that having too many choices actually make us less happy. Subjective well-being, what it is, what promotes it, has become an active and exciting area of research. Thank you so much for learning psychology with me today. Hope you enjoyed. See you next time.